head to the counter and bust open a bag of stale popcorn that's been held within its plastic walls for about 65 weeks. That is the texture of the last video store and the memories I'm trying to evoke via the nostalgia of taking a step back and remembering how one discovered the movies they love for the rest of their lives. This is the last video store and I am its clerk, Alexi Toliopoulos. Thank you for ingesting this show in either the video format on YouTube or via your ears, exclusively on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and whatever weird podcast app you might be using. What we do on this show is we chat to cool and interesting and exciting people about the films they love in the style of a video store rental combo of 1 new release, 2 weeklies, and then I'm going to provide them with a bonus staff pick recommendation based on those films. Joining me on today's episode, we've got one of the freaking legends of podcasting, Charlie Clausen. You know Charlie as a great actor. He's on almost every single Aussie TV show ever. You also know him from Everyone Relax, which is the new parent umbrella for all the podcasts he makes with Will Anderson, including Tofop Plus Friends, the AFL podcast that I've never listened to because I'm not a sports guy. Two Guys, One Cup, but I do know the title of it. It just took me a second to remember it. Also, Willosophy's on there. So all of the stuff is finally together under one home. And I'm going to say something very nice about Charlie. He's so sweet and so supportive. The day that we launched this show, he was literally the first person to message me to tell me how excited he was about it. He shared it, and he shared with me that he was not unlike me. He served behind the counter of a video store. And that is why I've been dying to get him on this show, because it's very rare that we get someone that stepped into my shoes. And finally, we have some empathy on this show. Please welcome today's guest, the great, the wonderful Charlie Clausen. Well, if it isn't another soldier of cinema jumping back into the trenches of the video store, Charlie Clausen, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm very honoured to be here with a fellow soldier of cinema.
You know, it is our duty to love films, to help people find films. And as I understand, when this show started first coming out, I'm not kidding. You were the first person that messaged me going like, I'm obsessed. This is where I started as well, was in a video store. Can you tell me about the video store you worked in?
Yeah, so I worked in, there was a smaller franchise called Movieland. I'm not sure if it was in New South Wales. It was definitely in Victoria. There was quite a few Movielands. And all through high school, I was like, that's the dream. That's the dream job. I just loved going to the video store. I come from a big Catholic family, and we didn't have a video, like a VCR, until we used to borrow, friends would go on holiday and we'd borrow their VCR, and then we'd go to the video store and have a weekend to borrow movies.
It sounds like there's nothing more forbidden than that. If you had to go we need to borrow from someone else.
Yeah,
so we need to go get it.
And so I finally convinced my parents to get a VCR, and then it was just magic. And what I loved about it is I was a kid who loved horror but was terrified of horror. Oh. But when I would work up the courage to go down the horror aisle of the video store, and just there's so many films that I haven't seen, but I can remember the artwork so clearly.
Yes.
And even to look at the back and see sometimes if you looked at Day of the Dead or whatever, they might have guts or something. You're like, oh God. And so that magic stayed with me right through high school. And so when I got into uni, I just went and handed my resume and got this job. And it was a good thing that I loved movies because the pay was terrible.
Oh, yeah.
It must have been barely minimum wage, but the perks of it. And I was studying communications at uni as well, and, film. And so it was just this kind of, all the things that I loved, I was doing all the time. So it was one of those things where it was I'd go to uni during the day and talk film, then I'd go to work and take films home, and just being able to borrow videos for free.
Yeah.
Was just and this was, I think I was there for the transition from VHS to DVD.
Wow.
So when DVDs came in, I remember the Matrix DVD came out and it was like, all these bonus features. And we're like, bonus what? You know? And like going around to a friend's place and watching all these bonus features. And then that became my new obsession, was like,
fully exploring everything.
Need the bonus features.
Yeah.
Like I've got to check, if I'm going to buy that DVD, the double disc set, what are the bonus features? It's got to be worthwhile.
Do you have a particular favorite bonus feature? Like one that has just stuck with you as much as a movie?
I don't know. I mean, there's some really great commentaries out there. I think a film we're going to talk about a bit later, Near Dark, the making of I have a DVD that I got from somewhere. I think I bought it from Tower Records in LA. But the documentary about the making that film is just as entertaining as the film itself, because you got Lance Henriksen, who's such a great character actor, really breaking down his process and just how method he went to play a 200-year-old vampire. And it's just, I remember watching it going, oh, this is brilliant. Like, you just would love to be able to work with actors like this one day.
Man, I would love to take you back, if we can close our eyes and picture going back to that video store. Can you tell me about like walking up those aisles, like especially that horror aisle? What were the kind of things that you were discovering and finding?
Well, Movieland was kind of good because it wasn't like Blockbuster, and I feel like Video Easy had fairly safe kind of selections.
Perfectly put, man. Like they would have like a pretty big range, but I think when you were at like the Video Easies or your Blockbusters, like those mainstream, big, high-end box rentals, you're kind of missing out on like the deeper cuts and a lot of like the personality that comes with a smaller franchise or a mom and pop store. You know?
Exactly. And also like some of the shit that just shouldn't be available for like kids to rent, like Shocking Asia 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Like
they don't have the video nasties out on those shelves.
No, not anymore. And it was funny too, because I was really getting into kind of like Argento and Romero at the time. And so I remember like Movieland had some pieces of the puzzle missing, but on my way home on the train line, there was another independent video store called Video Vision in St Kilda, and they were another like just had all these like amazing obscure
like specialized store almost.
Yeah, specialized, and also like it was just a weird store where you could also buy like, do you remember those rubber masks like they wear in Point Break? Like they had these celebrity masks, so you could buy you could rent your videos and also get like a grotesque celebrity mask.
Yeah, I can watch a Robert De Niro movie as Robert De Niro. What a dream!
So I remember they had a Tina Turner mask that was the most racist caricature like I'd ever seen. But they had these great like all these like low budget Italian horror films and
all those gialli type stuff.
Yeah, and I really got into Romero, like Monkey Shines and all these kind of like sort of, they felt like, I think the good thing about it was I started to see the craft beyond the shock value of it. Like when I was a kid, my favorite sort of franchise was Nightmare on Elm Street. I was terrified but fascinated at the same time. But I found the sort of sadism of Freddy Krueger like a bit confronting for like, an 8, 9, 10-year-old. But then as I got older, you start to look at the craft behind it, and it's like, it's Chuck Russell, and then it's like, Rennie Harlan, and then you start going, well, who influenced them? And then you go back to Romero. And I remember watching Dawn of the Dead. I'd seen Night of the Living Dead and was like, oh, this is like a student film. It's this old, creaky black and white. But then watching Dawn of the Dead and going, wow, like, this is like art and there's pathos, and
it's using not even genre to like communicate a message as well.
And even though it's kind of goofy, like, the especially by today's standards, the prosthetics and the makeup is so rudimentary, but that's kind of not the point. Like I heard when you were talking to the Cairns brothers about their film, Late Night with the Devil, and they were talking about sneaking in, messages within. And I feel like that was my first awareness that it's like, oh, it's not just about shocking and upsetting your parents.
Yeah.
Some really, like Wes Craven, it's a great documentary. I think it's called American Nightmares.
Never Sleep Again? Like there's a documentary that's like 5 hours long.
I've seen that one. There's a horror documentary made by a guy, I know, Adam Simon, who's an American filmmaker. And it's John Carpenter and it's Wes Craven and Tom Savini and all these icons of 70s, 80s horror. And, Wes Craven was a very like articulate, well-educated artist. And he was bringing that point of view to a genre that was cheap and nasty, new line, but elevating the material, because he's really delving deep into what scares us. And then,
it's that primal fear that he's tapping into.
Yeah, like the Freddy Krueger's look came from an incident when he was a kid looking out the window at a homeless man.
Yeah.
And the homeless man, one of those times, where the guy just clocked him and looked up at him and was wearing that stripy top and had the fedora. And you can so clearly see that in the styling. It feels so personal, the way Freddy, like apart from obviously the grotesque makeup, but that character feels, it speaks to a childhood fear of old men or like old people in general.
Its fear is always the things that you don't know about or that you kind of like brush up into your realm where you just have like just enough understanding to know I don't like this.
Yeah.
And I think my journey with horror is so similar to yours. Like I was afraid of horror. I was coming up like of age when the horror mode was torture porn and Japanese horror, J-horror remakes, like American J-horror remakes.
Little girls with long stringy hair.
Exactly. And lots of wetness. Like everyone is damp and soaking. And whether it
Everyone's
be blood or muck.
not going to move properly. Everyone's like doing these weird calisthenics.
And it was just like, that shit really disgusted me and really freaked me out. But it wasn't until like I started working in the video store around the same age as you were and going to film school. And horror was like where I started exploring because I was all about like discovering film technique and understanding film technique. And it was like, well, what's a better place than the one genre where they're trying to elicit a very specific response from their audience and they have to use technique to get it.
Yeah.
So it was what really expanded my mind was like walking up that horror aisle.
And you can't rely on you don't need to rely on stars.
You don't have to,
You can make a terrifying horror film off for the $10,000 budget, like Blair Witch Project. And I've always... that term elevated horror, I kind of bristle against because I'm like, look, there are different levels of horror and, there's different outcomes and what people are trying to achieve. But the idea that it's some kind of like lesser genre.
Yeah.
When Ridley Scott made a horror film with his debut movie, and it's it's a classic. It's one of the best like horror films of all time.
Yeah.
Just because the genre doesn't define the filmmaker, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Absolutely. I mean, the star is the monster or the star is the genre. Well, I'm going to send you out to pick up your own rental combo of 1 new release, 2 weeklies, and I'm going to provide you with a staff pick recommendation based on that taste. And I'm going to make this assumption. I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of horror films that have something hidden deep within them.
Yes. You'll hit the nail right on the head.
Wow. Well, call me the Hammer Brother, because that's what I
do. New release.
Whoa, okay, I'm feeling a lot of dark energy emanating from this little bundle of deviousness sitting in front of us.
Yeah.
You've got a great new release film, and I'm going to say this, an Aussie future classic, and also the disc that's sitting in front of us, you have the first rare distinction of having a Blu-ray where I am one of the special features.
Oh, really? You're on
yes, of course. You've got Talk to Me by the Philippou Brothers.
Horror.
Yeah, this is this is going to sound so patronizing. I was so happy for those boys because I discovered Raka Raka about 10 years ago. And I remember watching it and being like, who the fuck are these guys?
Yeah.
Like, they're amazing filmmakers and the energy and so I remember like I'd sort of bumped into them from time to time on stuff I was working on as an actor. And I did the second series of Wolf Creek and they were doing some EPK stuff for that. And I remember sort of just like saying, oh guys, I just, love your channel. They were lovely, but I just was waiting for them to their feature film. And I was like, oh, maybe it's hard for you. Like a lot of YouTubers have tried to expand and go sort of long form and it doesn't happen. And part of me was like, oh, maybe they're going to just stay in YouTube, which is fine. But I hadn't really heard anything in the pre-production about this film being made. I just sort of heard about it after it sort of exploded.
Yeah.
So I went into it thinking, oh, it's going to be that high octane balls to the wall Raka Raka experience.
Yeah. Or that kind of like, they were very good at like blending horror and comedy, like genre and comedy.
Yeah.
And I was expecting their film to be more overtly funny.
Yeah, or adolescent at least. But then you watch it and it's like from the very first scene, it's this really mature, like perfectly paced, cerebral, slow creeper of a film. But the one thing, if I had to come up with one word that sums it up, it's authenticity. I watch this film and I'm like, there is no artifice to this really. Like, it's teenagers who you don't recognize, who feel like real teenagers in a suburb of Adelaide that feels real, speaking in a way that feels like authentic, that someone like my age could never conceive of, dialogue like that.
Yeah.
You know, the way they react when things start going haywire felt very authentic to the way like teenagers today would react. Everything about it felt real, and I don't want to like keep leaning back on the 70s as if like, you know, we can't make good films, but it did have this 70s kind of aesthetic to me in the way that like you watch The Exorcist and nothing happens really in the first 30, 40 minutes of that film. It just plays like a drama about this movie star and her kid, you know, like trying to adapt to this lifestyle and, you know, where they're living. But then when shit starts to ramp up, it doesn't let up. And I mean, it's funny too, because I didn't have moments of like shock or horror watching it, but it's the dread. Like it's that sense of dread, which when you think about the themes of the film are, you know, grief and the way grief doesn't leave you and it lingers. And that's what the film does. Like I saw it and we never, like my wife loves horror as well. She's a director and we never do this, but we were watching it and the security light in the carport went off and we were like, is someone out there? Like it's a motion sensing security light. Yeah. And so she's like, you have to go check. And I'm like, I don't really feel like in the mood.
Equipped.
So I had to go out and check and then go back and watch the film. And then it just sat with me for like a week, I reckon. And I really started to kind of like think about it. It's like, I have to go back and watch it again and just sort of investigate what's going on. And so I've seen it about 3 times now. And every time I watch it, I pick up new details, extra layers. The way I feel about certain characters has shifted. You know, I started off thinking, poor Mia, what a victim. Now I'm like, I don't know that Mia's that good a guy, you know. I think she brought a lot of this on herself, you know. Everything about it I just think is so accomplished. And again, to sound condescending, I'm so proud of those boys.
Hey, I'm proud of them too, man, because it's like one of those things that it feels inevitable they were going to make something like this, but it was such a surprise. Like truly such a surprise. I love what you said, like that last little bit that you just said about, oh, maybe Mia's not such a great guy. Like, to me, that's what horror is. It's all about transgression. And so much about horror is about going beyond what one should be in, like going beyond the realm of one should be and transgressing against whether it be God or against humanity or what is acceptable. And then the punishment and the glee for the audience and the prize for the audience is seeing that comeuppance for transgressing. And I would say, I think that this film, I love the way you talk about being quite mature, because I think the way that this film plays with this portrayal of death and grief, I think it's so complex and it's actually quite deep. And that's in no small part due to Sophie Wilde's like riveting
unbelievable. And that's another like little subplot to the enjoyment of it, is knowing that they backed her in. You know, the Hollywood studio said we want a bigger name, and they took their money away, and the Filippos were just like brave enough to go, no, this is our girl, and they were so right. She's magnetic, you know, she's brilliant.
And it's that like physicality that she's able to bring to this, of just like the outstanding stuff is you believe every second she's possessed. Like that is someone else within her body. She's able to commit to that and make it just absolutely uneasy. But then the magic of the performance is, for me, it's so much about her searching for joy in grief, which I think is the mature aspect of this thing. Because when everyone goes through grief, everyone goes through some kind of mourning, and so much of the day-to-day is trying to find happiness throughout it. I think what she's doing there, it's just, I don't know, it's like, to me, it's real. Like it's back to that authenticity.
Yeah, and it's that balance too, isn't it? Of like, you can make a film where the themes are really heavy, and how do you make it entertaining? Like, what makes an audience want to stick with this story and still like, because there's moments of real levity and fun and silliness, and you know,
I mean that great montage to the like Edith Piaf remix, totally. Where like everyone's mucking around in the possession space is so fun.
Well, you know, it's funny. Like, there's been this real trend towards, and I think it's a worthwhile trend, you know, like I felt like it started with It Follows, where filmmakers were homaging, you know, the greats of like John Carpenter or Argento, and even in the way the films were kind of like, you know, from everything from the titles to how they, you know, put the credits before the film, you know, just trying to evoke that feeling of, this is like when I used to watch films when I was a kid. But Talk to Me felt entirely fresh.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like, oh, do you remember, films from the 80s or the 70s? And it also didn't feel like, oh, this is a Michael Bay, Platinum Dunes, high octane. It was something unique, and I think that, because that's always the debate as filmmakers in this country, it's like, well, you really want to just make it with Australian accents and about Australian topics because that's not going to travel. And I'm sure there would have been a bunch of people saying, oh, if they made Talk to Me with American cast, it would have made $500 million or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's as special. I think that Australian stories are important and worth telling. And, the fact that it's Aussie accents and Aussie kids in the suburbs of Australia. I think if I was a foreigner, I'd be like, this is what actually makes it interesting. Because if it was just your, WB cast, cookie cutter.
Everyone's doing accents.
Yeah.
Or it's like, that false kind of like any town America.
Yeah.
It's like the specificity that makes this freaking universal because it taps into like,
it's real.
This is it. This is real.
Yeah.
Man, okay. But with your last moments there, I got to say, I would elect you as Prime Minister of Australia. I would vote for you. Saying that Australian stories are important, I'm like, okay, let's get the ballot out. I'm voting for this guy. Well, that's Talk to Me. And I love that you talked about The Exorcist with it because when I interviewed the guys, like I hosted the Australian premiere of this film, I asked them, like, what were your influences? Because, like you said, it's so fresh, I couldn't detect, like, oh, it must be this. And they said The Exorcist was the key text for them, was like finding that sense of dread, that sense of like something beneath what we understand. And I was just like, far out. That's perfectly it.
You think about like Ellen Burstyn's performance in The Exorcist is so brilliant and so heartbreaking, especially, as Reagan is just spiraling out of control and no one can help her, and the helplessness of that. And I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it because it's...
You actually are.
I am. Look,
he actually is.
Because there's a helplessness that she's feeling. And, that's what makes The Exorcist such a powerful film. I mean, it's funny. Like I talk to some people... I was raised Catholic, so it speaks directly to my greatest fears.
Yeah, exactly.
But the idea that something so innocent and pure could be taken over by something so malicious and sadistic, that is a horrible fear for a parent to have. This film does it, but in a different kind of way. Yeah. Like it's a teenager who has lost the parents. Not a parent worrying about her daughter, it's actually the opposite. It's about a teenager who lost a parent and never got to say goodbye, has some doubts about how her mother died. The voices in her head, did her father like help her enough? All this kind of stuff.
It could be a horror movie without the possession.
100%.
Like it's already there. The thing that I've always wanted to ask the guys, and I'm dying to, now that I've seen this movie a bunch of times, is so like I'm Greek like these guys, and so much of my understanding of grief, mourning, and loss is tied up and wrapped up with my cultural heritage. Like there's a lot of baggage there. The way that Greeks mourn, I would say, is fucked up. Like it's never ending, it's constant, it's just there. And I'm dying to kind of know like how their Greekness informed that.
It'd be interesting.
Because there's no direct link in the film, but feeling-wise, I think it's all there.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think this is a great new release pick. It's all I can say, it's a future classic.
Yeah.
Absolute future classic worldwide of this genre.
Absolutely.
Weekly.
Let's get into your weeklies. And
Okay.
I'm already tying in a little theme. Talk to me. There's a bit of a, I guess, an allegory between like a horror metaphor for drug use, drug taking.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little present in your first weekly.
100%, which is Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark.
Cult.
One of the great directorial debuts in genre history.
Yeah.
Tell me about when Near Dark first came into your life.
Well, it was on, back when free-to-air was still the dominant form of entertainment.
Did they let this play on TV?
It played on TV, and
Oh
I
my
remember
God.
seeing it sort of like probably early 90s, and I was a nerdy teenager, and so Saturday nights I wasn't at parties. I was at home watching what was on.
Well, I
after.
can't relate to that at all, man. Pretty weird stuff.
But I remember Near Dark came on, and I was a massive fan of Aliens.
Yeah.
I think Aliens is Back to the Future and Aliens are probably the two films that I've like watched the most, and I still think that Aliens in terms of a third act, I don't know many films that have a better third act where the stakes just keep getting higher and higher and higher, and just when you think they get higher again. Like in terms of like
that
the
escalation.
If you're a screenwriter and it's like you've got to give your protagonist some obstacles, it's like James Cameron is relentless.
Yeah.
So I was really intrigued because I'm like, I can't. Hudson's
50% of the cast are back in this one.
Totally. And then I watched it and I just was so blown away by the romance of it. Like it's not really a horror film or even it's a Western, right?
Yeah, it's a neo-Western.
It's a neo-Western.
With like a vampire bite to it.
And it was so ahead of its time because, it has this kind of like swooning, like romance, love story between Adrian Pizzar and what's her name, the girl who plays May. She only did a couple of Julie Wright.
Yes.
And
Jenny Wright.
Jenny Wright, sorry. And so you've got this kind of like love story, but then you've got this traveling band of freaks like Jenny's family who, like you say, the metaphor is like junkies, clearly.
Yeah.
They live in a van with the windows boarded up and they travel around from town to town. And my only experience of vampires to that point was either like classic sort of, Hammer horror vampires or sexy Lost Boys vampires. We're cool and sexy and we've got crucifix earrings and we ride motorbikes and
this
stuff.
one comes like just after that vampire resurgence with Lost Boys.
I think it came out the same year, but it got lost in there was 2 vampire films and they were deep impact to Lost Boys as Armageddon.
And what I was reading about this film, because like I'm a big vampire movie nut. Like it's maybe sneakily, even next to like religious horror, my favorite subgenre of horror. I think that with vampire films, there's something about like that resurgence of like, there's a freedom that's expressed with vampires, or it's like distilling in time. And with this one being, what I read was Catherine Bigelow and the screenwriter, they wanted to make a Western. They wanted to make a neo-Western. They couldn't do it. So they're like, okay, what's happening right now? Vampires. Let's inject that in. And what comes out of that is like this grimy, completely original take on vampire mythology. And like you said, it's that cast. And there are some deranged characterizations there. Maybe let's talk about Lance Henriksen because...
Well, before we get Adrian Pazdar or Padizar, I never know, Adrian Pazdar. No offense, but is probably the most forgettable leading man. Like he's playing a role, and that role is to be a naive country boy who gets sucked into this. But when you put him up against like some of the greatest character actors of the last 30 years, Jeanette Goldstein.
Incredible.
Like I'm such a huge...
When he puts up against the cast of Aliens, that's when you start feeling it.
Bill Paxton, Jeanette Goldstein, Lance Henriksen, like... I'm such a nerd for this film that so Jeanette Goldstein's pretty much retired from acting now, and she runs a line of lingerie for like plus size women. That's her kind of.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Well, because I'm a nerd, I found this out, and I was in LA. This is like I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And I made a special trip out to East LA to her lingerie store under the guise of buying my wife some lingerie.
Yeah.
And then when she came out, I was like, I sort of bought the lingerie and I said, I'm really sorry about this. I said, but like Near Dark is one of my absolute favorite films. Diamondback is such a brilliant character. I love the way you design the costume and blah, blah. She was so lovely. Like she could not have been nicer. Posed for some photographs. She signed some merch for me and stuff like that. I was the biggest nerd. But the way that's why I say the bonus features, if you can track down, I think it's on YouTube, the making of, what that cast did in terms of bonding, very similar to what the original Mad Max biker cast did. They just hung out together, they rode their motorbikes together, and they became a gang. So Lance Henriksen, Jeanette Goldstein, Bill Paxton, they all said, okay, let's actually run some rehearsals where we work out what is it like for us to wake up in the morning where sunlight could kill us. So, all right, we're going to board up the windows. So they would do like drills where they would see how quickly they could get into a room, get the blinds down, seal up the doors, and this was their rehearsal, was how do we survive? And that kind of second nature instinct is just implicit in the performance, From an acting point of view, like I know that when you're prepping for a role, if you have a specific skill set, like you're playing a doctor or a cop or you've got to handle a firearm or whatever it is, you've got to put in so much work in that so you can convincingly portray someone who does this every day as their job. Second nature. It's like when you see someone playing a blind person, and they haven't done the work, then you see them like fumbling around as if that person hasn't lived with that condition their entire life. And so to see the way they play this kind of like roaming band of misfits. Like it's so they have a history to it. The dynamic between them, like Diamondback and Jesse. Like you understand that they love each other, but maybe it's an open relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then like there's this weird family dynamic with Homer, the boy, who's actually 150 years old, but Diamondback converted him because she wanted a son. There's all this like. But none of that is expressed in the text.
No.
That's all what you're picking up just in the dynamics, or the wardrobe. Like Jeanette Goldstein has got this like faded peroxide. She was a flapper in the 1920s, He was a Civil War era like soldier. And
the history is in the costumes. It's in how they
and
play.
the performance, and everything about it is just so brilliant. And then you've got Catherine Bigelow's, she's one of the greatest visual stylists, I think. I'm so glad that she sort of got some recognition after Hurt Locker. And like, I think Zero Dark 30 is a completely underrated film because that sort of inverts, like she made her name in action.
Yeah.
And then she makes an action movie that subverts the concept of action, that starts with explosions and finishes with this very sad shot of Jessica Chastain having successfully found Osama bin Laden just sitting on an airplane as the door shuts on her own. It's like, so what was that all worth?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I love that you call her a visual stylist because so much of this film and so much of her work, like I love Strange Days as well.
Oh,
like,
the
that could
opening
be
sequence of Stranger Days
incredible.
is just like...
And she's able to like capture such great
Did I say
pacing.
Strange Days?
Yeah,
Stranger
both
Things.
Both count. I'm gonna I'll cut out that little R if we
thank
have
you.
to. But I think like she's just like such a director that brings perfect pacing to things. And we talk about like that genre hybridity in this between Western and vampire film. The way that she's able to merge the two in this climax is incredible because we have this climax that's a shootout, a classic trope of the Western, but she's able to amplify that sense of danger and that sense of dread because with each bullet piercing through the walls or cracking through the windows, sunlight peeks through as well. And it's just those two things, those two genres climaxing at the same time in the same way, using the same techniques. It's kind of mind melding.
Yeah.
Mind melting, not mind melding.
Well, it could be mind melding.
Yeah, you become Spock. We're Vulcans. We mind melded with this movie.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. And she also, maybe it's because, my wife's a director and I've seen what she's had to sort of face in terms of getting her career started. And there is still a lot of obstacles to female directors, especially when it comes to genres, and for her first 3 or 4 films, like she had a studio sitting on her shoulder saying, we're going to watch the dailies. If we're not happy within the first week, you're fired. Like that would not have happened to a male director.
No.
It was just because women can't do action. And then
They can't trust.
Then you think of like Point Break, Blue Steel, like all these films that she did. And she's like, still not getting trusted, And so it's just, there's so much about, and then they've got one of the greatest kind of most terrifying bloodbath sequences, which is where they walk into the bar, the finger licking good scene, which James LaGrosse has a little cameo in that scene. But just everything about that scene is so masterful because these are the bad guys, but there is a little bit of a thrill in watching what they do to this. It's not that they're like rednecks. They're not even really threatened. They're not bad people. But there's a little bit of a thrill in watching these vampires walk into a room and just rip it up.
Yeah.
And it's done with no music. It's not meant to excite you. It's really just matter of fact. They're just killing people, drinking blood, cracking jokes, and the whole thing is just so disturbing, but also like exciting.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. It's not just you and I that are big fans of this film. One of the great friends of genre cinema, it's one of her favorite films as well. 5 stars from Margaret Pomeranz.
Oh, really?
One of her favorite films. Not only just 5 stars on release, she brought it back decades later as one of her classic picks on revamped at the movies. And I'll read you what she said about it. It's so visually beautiful. It's breathtaking at times. The scene where Caleb sucks blood from the wrist of May while 2 oil wells pump away behind them is strangely, terribly moving. The soundtrack by Tangerine Dream, which we haven't even talked about, is a knockout. The story, the visuals, the music all combined so that you gasp at the sheer beauty of it. Once again, the value of family comes through strongly in this American film. And once again, you can see the vampire story is an allegory for our drug-infested world.
Yes. Now, I'm going to be a contrarian and be very controversial here.
Please, please, please.
I don't like the Tangerine Dream score.
Wow.
I know, it's sacrilege.
Wow.
And I like Tangerine Dream, but I just feel like I don't know if it's the actual composition or the way the music is used, but I find it incredibly intrusive at points when I feel like it doesn't need it. Like, I think the film is so lyrical and beautiful, and Tangerine Dream, it creates a certain, it evokes a certain horror vibe, or can you have an oral aesthetic? I don't know.
I think you can. A sonic aesthetic.
A sonic aesthetic.
Yeah.
There's a tongue twister to say that 5 times.
Yeah, I didn't say it once, mate. I don't know if I can do it 5.
But I mean, it's my own. It's a very minor quibble, but I'm just like, oh,
You're allowed to quibble.
I'd love to rescore that film and something that's just a bit more.
Dude,
I don't know.
can I say maybe the score that I think you just take it out and slot it in because it's horror meets Western, that Nope score. I think Nope plays that Western feeling through their score so beautifully. And like, oh, maybe that's how we do New Dark again.
Yeah.
Pure dark, still dark.
Still
Trying to think of what we could call it.
Well, you know what? It's when I was in LA auditioning for stuff, Platinum Dunes had actually got the rights to Near Dark, and we are going to do a remake. And I hassled my manager. I said, I don't need Dark's one of my favorites. I have to. So I got an audition for Severin, the Bill Paxton role. And I read it and I'm like, this sucks. Like, it was so disappointing. Like, it was just like, it was such that sort of just a cookie cutter reboot. Let's just cash in on something that we can do.
Some kind of nostalgia.
The only new thing they added that was interesting is that Homer, the little boy vampire, was a pedophile hunter. Wow. Which I thought, oh, that's kind of dark and twisted and pretty cool. But he would just go online and set up, meetings with men and then just go out and murder them. I'm like, oh, that's a good way to sort of engender sympathy for a villain.
To catch a predator. I think if you get a little vampire boy to kill them, now that's exciting.
Yeah, really.
Before we move on, I just want to point out the cover that we've got here. It's definitely the Twilight re-release of this film.
Yeah, someone's tried to cash in.
And that's the way to see this film. Yeah, you got to see this film that way.
I mean, in some ways, like it's not a million miles away from Twilight in terms of the romance, but I would argue that it's infinitely more effective than Twilight.
And that is what Margaret and David talk about when they bring it back for that classic segment, I'll never forget it. I think that's how I was introduced to the film, in fact.
Really?
Yeah. All right, let's move on to your final weekly pick.
This is a sexy cover.
Oh,
I haven't
this
seen
is
this one.
Well, I was going to say it's a sexy film, but I don't think it is. But it's an very interesting film.
Yeah, Take Shelter, Jeff Nichols. This is 2011, I believe.
Yes.
Drama.
I feel like I saw this at the movies, but I can't be certain of that because Jeff Nichols is a director that I adore. Like, I don't really know if that's a commonly held idea, but I think what he does better than pretty much any of his other contemporaries is bridging high concept and really grounded drama.
The personal aspect of it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Richard Linklater meets Jordan Peele, you know?
Dude, you nailed it. That's spot on. The breath escaped my body as soon as you started saying, yeah, he is like Richard Linklater, but the genre Richard Linklater.
Yeah, and so, like, I think the first film of his I saw was Mud, and I'm like, oh, this is a really interesting film, and you can just sense that he's a craftsman, that, like, he doesn't need big budgets or special effects or anything like particularly enormous to happen. It's really just about the tension and what's at stake for the characters. And he's very good at making you understand, the character and the personal stakes for them in any situation. And so when Take Shelter came along, I'm like, I love Michael Shannon. What a great character actor. But I wasn't quite prepared for just what a powerhouse performance this is. And I also love the director-muse combo. Scorsese and De Niro, Scorsese and DiCaprio, Jeff Nichols and Michael Shannon.
Every Jeff Nichols film, Michael Shannon is either the star or the next supporting actor, basically.
Yeah. And I think that from what I understand of it is it's a bit of a mentoring kind of relationship. I don't know what Jeff Nichols' first film was, or if it was a student film.
Shotgun Stories, I believe it's
and
called.
is that Michael Shannon's in that?
Michael Shannon's in that too.
So I believe that Michael Shannon helped him get that made. And so from then on, the partnership was formed. And I love that because I think sometimes directors need a muse because they find an actor that understands their world and
understands their tone.
It's
like they can just bring it straight to the film.
And, I think Michael Shannon's great, he's got that face that looks like it should be on Mount Rushmore. Like it's carved out. It's carved out of granite. But I think he has this kind of wounded earthiness. Even when he's playing a bad guy, there's a kind of vulnerability to him and a pain, which I think just sort of runs through Jeff Nichols' films. And when he introduces the sort of heightened element, it's never really it's not like an M. Night Shyamalan twist where it's like, oh, you know, and then it turns out there's aliens. It's more about reflecting on the human condition, to sound wanky and
No,
film
we
schoolish.
love the word human condition on here. We love to say that.
But this film just unfolds, like I've got the screenplay at home on my desktop, and I often refer to
Desktop
it
computer or on your...
on my desktop computer. Sorry, yeah.
I thought you had a physical
I
script.
don't have a physical
That's
script.
exciting.
No.
And dangerous if you just leave it on the desktop all times. You could put a coffee on it, turn it into a Pacino script, mate.
I just think it's a real example of just like a no-fat screenplay. You know,
which is hard to translate when it's especially about something about like the depths of like the human condition, like you said, like that is hard to make something like that feel lean and to the point. And this is a film that is to the point.
Yeah, and it's also that thing too, like lots of films play with the idea of mental illness and, you know, warped reality and like an untrustworthy protagonist or whatever. But I feel like this film does it, in a way that doesn't feel exploitative. It's not like, oh, he's got a mental condition, but it's like it's a genuinely sensitive portrayal. This character knows that his mother suffered from a mental condition. He was too scared to explore what that was. When he starts having these terrible visions of, you know, the world coming to an end, his wife has to gently prod him into, do you think that maybe this could be the same thing your mother was going through? And it's not done in this kind of exploitative way. It feels very real. All you do is have empathy for Michael Shannon. You just feel like, I don't want to spoil it, but you feel like you know where the film is going and you feel like you know how they're going to resolve it, and then they manage to just turn the tables on you, and it's such a strangely uplifting, I guess it's validating. It's a validating end to the film, but it's just that way he manages to make you understand these characters. Like, you know, it's a cold opening of him having this nightmarish vision. Then within 5 minutes, you meet his family. He's got a daughter with special needs. He's a blue-collar guy, a driller. His best mate is, you know, a borderline alcoholic. And within like 8 or 9 pages, you understand the world and you understand who this guy is and what is important to him. And so when these things start getting threatened by his increasingly disturbing visions, you're invested.
Yeah.
And they don't need... Like he wrings so much tension out of this guy buying a shipping crate and burying it in the ground because he's trying to build a shelter.
Yeah.
But the whole time you're like, oh no, what's he doing? He's spiraling. And it's just, I think it's a masterful film.
I agree with you, because like if people aren't familiar with Take Shelter, what it is about, it's about a young husband and a father played by Michael Shannon who is plagued by this series of apocalyptic visions or premonitions and about like this storm coming, like this, like, you know, a biblical level storm, and questions whether he should be sheltering his family from this coming storm or from himself, because he has like these mental health issues and these hereditary issues of like paranoid schizophrenia. And I think what this film does, like, it marries 2 things. It marries, or 3 things rather. It marries almost like that biblical disaster genre that it's kind of playing into, but then it also marries it with like the fears, these existential fears that we face of climate crisis. But then also the deeper personal human story of it is it captures those feelings of anxieties. Like those anxieties that you have, especially like, you know, if you have a family, like
around parenthood.
Like, what are the anxieties you feel around your family and like helping them survive, and what is that? I think that's what this film does. Like, it just captures those feelings so honestly and the reality of those feelings so well, and marries them to like the genre aspect of this film as well.
I remember reading an interview with Jeff Nichols where he talked about, you know, what his North Star is, or his guiding principles with being a filmmaker. And he was talking about how, you know, he grew up in Texas, I believe, and, you know, around, you know, real sort of macho kind of guys. And he said that he's never seen one fight that has ended in like a heroic or spectacular way. He said it's always been ugly, it's always been messy, and it's always been kind of unresolved at the end. And he said that is life. And so he's not interested in making films where the hero punches out the bad guy and gets the girl. He said because life is complicated. And I feel that is the thing that I identify most with his films. Like, I've never been to the part of the world that he makes his films in, but I understand this idea that we're all flawed and that nothing works out the way we want it to. And even if we have like the most compelling visions, we're not even sure if they're right.
How can they be? How can you be sure? And I mean, Jeff Nichols, great filmmaker. He actually has a new film coming out
The
this
Hell's
year.
Angels one?
Yeah, it's called The Bike Riders, also starring Michael Shannon, Austin Butler, and Jodie Comer, and Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy, yeah.
I cannot wait for this movie. I think it is...
Did you see Loving, the film with Joel Edgerton?
I quite like that a
Yeah.
lot too. I
It's
think
really understated.
really understand. It's kind of like a bit of a departure from
Yeah.
the other stuff that he's made. But I think he's either a master now or a future master of cinema.
Yeah, I wonder, because there's another director that I thought was going to be a master of cinema who's quit, apparently. It was just Shane Carruth, who only made 2 films, Primer and Upstream Colour. And they're 2 films that I love but do not understand.
Yeah.
They're just, I
I've
find them...
grappled with them a lot of times.
Yeah,
I'll never get them.
imperceptible, and I think that is how they're designed. But I feel like it's so important to have filmmakers, and this is why sort of the death of independent cinema is, concerning. Is that we need voices like that, and this is the nostalgia and the longing we have for the video store. Is that sure you're going to have your blockbusters there and your Marvel movies and whatever, but we want to supplement the McDonald's with some healthy food every now and then, or just some stuff that we haven't seen before. And I feel like I'm not getting that same experience from streaming. I try my best to find some weird old films on streaming, but it's not the same experience. You just don't have that excitement about discovering something like you used to in the video store.
Well, I can't believe you set me up so perfectly to hopefully deliver that to you.
Okay.
You've just put the pressure on me.
Yeah,
I just
go
want
on.
your thumbprint go down on my hand and squeeze me. So we've come to that part of the show where I'm going to give you my staff pick recommendation. Hopefully based on your taste, based on what I know, and far out, brother, based on this beautiful conversation we've just shared.
Staff pick.
I was trying to think what we have in common here, and so much of it is horror genre, but married with personal stakes and married with some kind of metaphorical allegory that can be used via genre to communicate to an audience. And I was struggling because I came down to 2 movies and they were extremely hard to separate, to pick you just one. And I pray that these are discoveries for you, but they seem right up your alley.
Okay.
And I couldn't get down to just one. And then I remembered, because you served in the line of fire behind the counter at one of the great video stores, Videoland.
Movieland.
Movieland, squeeze me.
R.I.P.
And you went to Video Vision. I combined the 2.
Yeah.
In heaven, it's Videoland where they come together. And I can give you the special employee pick.
Oh, okay.
So I can give you the employee bundle where I'm going to give you 2 recommendations.
All right, great.
And the reason I'm giving you 2 is because I'm going to describe 2 movies exactly the same way.
Okay.
Both are vampire films
All right.
released in the year 1995 that use vampirism as an allegory for drug addiction.
Okay.
Do you know, are these ringing any bells for you currently?
95.
Well, there's 2 of them that are described exactly that way, but
Okay.
they're actually such different films. And I went through a big vampire kick last year, and these are 2 that I watched on the exact same week, and they both blew me away. And I think they're 2 of my all-time favorite vampire films. I'm going to kick it off with this one film by Abel Ferrara.
Oh, yes.
Who is one of the great New York filmmakers, one of the great grub auteurs, in my opinion, with his film The Addiction, starring Lily Taylor and Christopher Walken.
I've never seen this.
Horror.
So what this film is for me, it's exactly how I described it. It's a New York vision of vampirism, and it is gritty, but what it is, it's like a new kind of evocation of the vampire mythology through that kind of drug allegory, where Lily Taylor becomes a vampire, and then it becomes a study of her wandering the streets in this nocturnal aspect, and it just feels so evocative. And this is one of the most beautiful visions of New York that I've ever seen. It's shot by Ken Kelch, who's one of the great cinematographers, especially when working with Abel Ferrara. What this film is, it's captured entirely in black and white, and it almost captures these visions of New York that feel like video essays.
Oh, wow.
I mean, or photo essays even,
Right.
where you've just got these long shots, these long takes of just a big image where, you've got your subject in the field of the screen, but then somehow you're capturing all these actual observations of New York City as well.
Sounds a bit like Naja, but like
Yes.
not a European film. Like it's not like an American version. Is it similar to that? Black and
I would
white?
say it's not dissimilar from Naja. Like
Yeah.
I would say this is like almost a 90s resurgence of vampire films that are like these gritty things.
I'd like to. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
That's
I
exciting.
think this is like populated by some of the best like New York actors. Like so many people that you love pop up in this film. I was truly stunned by this film, and this is the one that made me go, oh, maybe Abel Ferreira, I hate to say it, is one of my guys.
Yeah.
One of the greatest scrubs, and I love him.
Yeah,
I absolutely
grub.
love him. The next film is also 1995 vampire film set in New York City that is about an allegory for drugs. It's really gritty, but in a completely other, like a really different mode. It's a movie by Larry Fessenden. Do you know Larry Fessenden?
No.
He'll be right up your alley.
Okay.
He is a character actor and horror auteur who made this film called Habit in 1995. I've only got a big collection of Larry Fessenden films.
Yeah, wow.
Horror.
But Habit is about an addict who in New York City who's just broken up with a girlfriend. His father has just died, and he becomes like this sloppy drunk who falls into the arms of Anna, a mysterious vampire. And it's also one of those things like, is this vampirism? Is it not? But what it captures is it plays with that mythology and that central metaphor in a way that is, they're in equal measure of each other, but entirely different from the addiction. And it shares, like it truly shares no DNA. These two films share no DNA, except for I have to describe them in the bare bones in the exact same way. I just think that the addiction and Habit is just like one of the best vampire films I've ever seen.
Oh,
and
great.
it's probably, I would even say like Take Shelter is a good one too between these two films, in that it is like this auteur-driven thing, but it is a character study at its heart, whereas addiction is less of a character study. It's more of like a study of a city at night.
Right.
And Habit is about this one man who's struggling and the people around him and how they're trying to communicate with him and how they're trying to pull him back.
Do you actually see any vampires in it, or is it implied vampirism?
No, you see vampirism.
Okay.
So it's like, it is a genre entry, but it's like it's probably the same way that Take Shelter is, where like, how truthful is what I'm seeing? Like, is that honesty, or is that through an unreliable narrator who's losing his mind?
Okay.
But it's straight up genre.
Yeah,
it's
great.
very cool.
That's very exciting.
Well, you've got a beautiful bundle here. You've got
Yeah,
Talk
amazing.
to Me, your new release film. You've got Near Dark. You've got Take Shelter. And then you've got that beautiful Staff Pick employee discount,
amazing.
where you get Larry Fessenden's Habit and Abel Ferreira's Addiction.
Can you clear my overdue fines as well while we're here?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to give you an extension because you've got a lot of movies here and they're not quite short. So I'm going to give you a few extra weeks to watch all of these.
Great. Thank you.
But Charlie, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Pleasure. Anytime.
Hey, before we kick you out of this store with this pick, you've got everything's bloody combined right now.
That's
Can
right.
you
I do.
break it
I
down
do
for us?
hundreds of podcasts.
Yeah, they're all one now.
Me and Will Anderson do a bunch of podcasts, but we've decided we've consolidated them all into the one feed. So just search Everyone Relax wherever you get your podcast to listen to everything Will and Charlie from now on.
Well, they're all there. And you know what? Thank you for making convenient. I really appreciate it.
Anything for you, Alexi.
Oh, thank you. It was all because of me.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks so much, Charlie.
No
and
worries.
hopefully, come back anytime, man. You can
I'd
sit
love
on
that.
this side of the counter one day as well
Yeah,
if you want.
great. Hopefully pay me a bit more than the original video store.
I hate to break it to you, probably not. A lot of less people. We only get one person a week here, and usually I give it to them on the house.
Yeah, right.
The last video store.